Family Plot is a 1976 crime thriller by the one and only Alfred Hitchcock. I've been getting into his stuff a little more recently because I bought a box set of some of his films, which are about half classics, you might say, and half less known, I would say. I was not terribly familiar with his body of work before the box set. I had seen some of the mainstays like Psycho and Vertigo, Rear Window, but I honestly wasn't aware that he kept making films into the 70s. So I wasn't even aware that movies like Topaz and Family Plot and Torn Curtain, whatever, stuff like that even existed. Even some earlier stuff like The Trouble with Harry, never heard of that. I was watching Family Plot and I mean I didn't hate it or anything. I thought mildly positively about it overall because I do think it did some things really nicely. But my main takeaway was one specific scene, and I was thinking about it in contrast to The Thing, which I saw and reviewed recently, and how, one specific moment The Thing does really well that I think this movie doesn't quite grasp. So what I wanted to go over was score kind of generally. If you're thinking about score, you think about, what can score do for your movie? And it kind of seems generally, I mean, obviously it's as versatile as human creativity can go. But I would commonly think of it used in, reinforcing a character or perhaps reinforcing the tone at any given moment. Or perhaps setting, expectations. Something to that effect. It's certainly a storytelling device in its own right. I'm going to touch on this one scene from Family Plot and this one scene from The Thing. These are not going to be like huge spoilers or anything. They're scenes like from the middle of the movie. So in The Thing, we have Norris's transformation, which is a big moment, kind of cluing in the characters to what they're up against, or rather to the scale of what they're up against. This scene has no score. I mentioned earlier some common things we think of score doing, but I think it's really interesting to also consider what no score can do for a movie. So, in this scene, here's why I think no score helps it a lot. It's important that we're, right there in emotional lockstep with the characters. The focus of this scene is how real that threat is for them. The focus is their kind of disbelief and shock at what is happening to the person in front of them and what the capabilities of the monster are. We do not need the score to emphasize the tone. We don't need the score to emphasize any character emotions or progression or anything like that. Their experience is perfectly clear. Their emotional state is intuitive, makes a lot of sense. It doesn't need to be elaborated on. We have a clear element to hold our attention. That clear element is the monster, its qualities, what it's doing, how it looks, the physical effects of it. The reason it works to have no score is because we need to be point of view, we need to be experiencing exactly what we see them experiencing because it's perfectly understandable. In Family Plot, we have a scene where the two main characters are taking a drive. They're in their car. Another character has interfered with their car, cut the brake lines. They're careening down, this steep highway, this mountain highway. You can see the drop off to the side, stuff like that. There are other cars coming, the other way along the road to give, obstacles, etc., etc. There's no score in this scene. There's also a heavy comedic element, physical comedy. The, not the wife, the, whatever, girlfriend, is kind of freaking out. She's all over the guy, falling all over the place, sticking her feet up in the air, grabbing the steering wheel. So the question is, what is the tonal goal of this scene? And I think if you have to ask that question, you're already in a bad spot to not be using score. Because the thing is, score helps the audience figure out the tone. Score is like a little nudge in the right direction. It's not like the audience, an audience member, is consciously thinking, okay, what am I supposed to be feeling right now? What can I figure out? What can I look to help me figure out the tone? It's subconscious, but it's there. Like, it still pushes you in the right direction. It gives your brain something to go off if it's not immediately clear. So I think the film is instantly in trouble when it's trying to ditch the score for something with too competing elements, two competing tones like this. Because in addition to the physical comedy, like their characters are in a life-threatening situation, like they could die. So there's that element of suspense at odds with the presentation of the comedy. So at the very least, we've got tonal ambiguity. What I would expect in that situation is for the score to be a sort of tiebreaker. You can have the score enter in there, have a little bit of playfulness in the music, if you want to say, like, okay, the comedy is clearly a deliberate choice. That's a, the movie went way out of its way to include all that. That's a big focus. So the comedy obviously needs to be emphasized. Emphasize it. Make the scene funny. Like, you don't have to have that large of a reaction from the lady in that scene normally. So lean into it. I don't understand why you would leave it plainly like that. Like, you could argue it's supposed to be kind of deadpan comedy, because if there's no score, it's just flat. You're just left with the impression of this woman freaking out, basically. And that would be fine, but you also have the element of the life-threatening danger that just doesn't square with it, and you need something to push the audience in the right direction, because as is, it's just confusing what is supposed to be the result of that scene. Given the fact that the comedy was inserted, I have to assume it was going to be comedic, but I don't think the two mix on their own. I think you need to have the score pushing the audience in the right direction. But that's about it. I just thought that was kind of an interesting idea to think about why score might be utilized. Just to think about why it might be best to leave score out, what the use case for that might be, and why it might not work. I just think it's fun to think about ideas like that.